In this video we'll go on to look at 25 and 26. See if we can get further than that. Well, 25 is still a product rule, and with the only exception that one of the factors is a radical. So before we start, 25 could be rewritten as x times 1 minus x squared to the 1/2 power. And we can begin the product rule from there. So y prime would be the first times the derivative of the second. So it's x times, bring down the 1/2, reduce the exponent by 1, leave the inside alone, then multiply by the derivative of the inside, which would be negative 2x. And that's the 1d2 part. Then we need plus 2d1. And the second function is 1 minus x squared, quantity to the 1/2. The derivative of the first is just 1. And that part was pretty straightforward. Now we're going to simplify it. And in the first term, 2's will cancel, but we'll still have x squared. Then times 1 minus x squared to the negative 1/2. From there, it's plus 1 minus x squared to the 1/2. We're going to factor out the greatest common factor, which when we have negative exponents is going to be the largest negative exponent, which would be 1 minus x squared to the negative 1/2. Then that leaves x squared and plus quantity 1 minus x squared. Now we need to, when we multiply two numbers with the same base, we'll add our exponents. So negative 1/2 plus what equals positive 1/2? That will be 1. Or 2/2. Negative 1/2 plus 2/2 gives you positive 1/2. And of course 2/2 is 1, so we don't even need to display that. And fortunately this all works out pretty well. The x squared plus 1 minus x squared is just going to leave a 1. And so it simplifies to 1 minus x squared to the negative 1/2, or 1 over the square root of 1 minus x squared. Number 26. Again, we can do a simple rewrite there. 1/2 x squared times the quantity 16 minus x squared to the 1/2 power. And so we have a product, and the first function will be 1/2 x squared. The second function will be 16 minus x squared to the 1/2. And so we'll begin. It's 1d2. Y prime equals 1 is 1/2 x squared. d2 will be 1/2. Then reduce the exponent by 1, so it'll be to the negative 1/2. We'll leave the inside alone. Then times the derivative of the inside, which will be negative 2x, plus 2, not the number 2, the second function, which is 16 minus x squared to the 1/2, times the derivative of the first function, which is simply going to be x. We bring down the 2, cancels with the 1/2, and reduce the exponent, just gives x. So we'll start to simplify this. You have to be really careful with this. It's all algebra here. So you do have a 2, and that'll cancel with one of the 2's in the denominator, but we'll still be left with 1. And we have an x squared and an x, so we'll get 1/2, or I'll just write it as x cubed over 2 times the quantity 16 minus x squared to the negative 1/2 power, then plus x times 16 minus x squared to the 1/2. Alright, so when we go to factor, we're going to look for, we definitely have an x, and then we have 16 minus x squared, and we're going to take out the most negative exponent, which is the smallest that they both have in common, or the largest that they both have in common, I should say. And that's going to leave 1/2 x squared, or x squared over 2, and then again plus 16 minus x squared. But again, that's going to be to the first power. Negative 1/2 plus 2/2 is going to give you positive 1/2, and so we'll simplify that. We have negative 1/2 x squared minus x squared, so that'll be minus 1/2 x squared, or 16 minus 1/2 x squared. And the final simplification of that would be x times 16 minus 1/2 x squared all over the square root of 16 minus x squared. Now there's no more canceling that can be done there. Even though they look very close, these are not. They have no factors in common and cannot be canceled any further than that.